Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor at Thunderbird Aviation. We'll just give it a few more, just a couple more minutes here to make sure that everybody who wants to will have signed in. And I will make sure that I admit them all. And then we'll get started. I'm going to mute myself till then. So good afternoon, everybody. One more time, my name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor for Thunderbird Aviation. I'd like to thank you all to this FAA safety sponsored seminar, which is qualifying you for wings credits. Most of you have gotten on this seminar from the FAA safety.gov website, but I invited all the students from the Academy College to also participate in this. So just in case any of those show up, I just want to remind them that if they're not already registered on FAA-safety.gov, to make sure that they go ahead and do that. And I've lost that portion of stop share. And to do that, go to FAA-safety.gov, and this website will show up, and up here in the upper left-hand corner, if you're new to FAA-safety.gov, there's a section here for creating an account. Put in your name and email address and other information about what kind of pilot you are, and then you'll start getting information about safety seminars. And if you want credit for this, if you're not already signed up on FAA-safety.gov, make sure that you go here and sign this up so that next week when my friend who's a FAA safety team representative goes in to give everybody credit for this course, that you're already in there and ready to receive the credit. So today we're going to talk about the make sure everybody's here. Okay, everybody's been admitted, so we'll see how that works. So today we're going to talk about aviation acronyms. We as pilots use the acronyms all the time to help us remember various other things, but sometimes we know all sorts of acronyms and we know what all the words are, and most of the time what the words mean. But the trick is, where does some of this stuff come from? Some of the most widely used ones that are fairly obscure because they come from various sources in both the regulations and in other parts of the aviation and even the non-aviation world. So we'll be working through various aviation acronyms as we go through today. Oops, went too far. So our topics today in the hour that we have is going to be the AERO acronym for all the aircraft documents that are required to be on the airplane before you go flying. Then we'll talk about the required maintenance that must be done on the airplane. Most people use the Aviate acronym. We'll talk about variations on that theme when we get to it. There's an acronym we use here at Thunderbird Aviation to remember the pre-flight actions required by 91.103, all the things you're supposed to do before you get in the airplane to go flying. And finally, 91.205, all the required equipment. This question always comes up during my end of course checks that I do, especially for the private pilot and the commercial pilots, where we're talking about what happens if something's wrong with the airplane. And one of the things you have to check is to make sure that the piece of equipment that's broken is not required by 91.205, this particular regulation. So we'll go through all the lists, both VFR, night, and IFR in that section, to make sure that we cover all the various types of flying that can possibly be done. So the first acronym we're going to do is the word AERO. The letter A in AERO stands for Airworthiness Certificate. I found this in 91.203. The Airworthiness Certificate: no person may operate an aircraft unless it has an appropriate and current airworthiness certificate. There's another part of the regulation that says that if you're flying passengers, that airworthiness certificate must be readily viewed by the passengers. Some people have various variations on a theme of what that means, especially in some of the airplanes I've flown where all the places to stick these documents are way down near the floor someplace. But the airworthiness certificate does not have an expiration date on it. The only way to know that the airplane is still airworthy to fly is, besides the pre-flight that you do on the aircraft before you go flying, is the next acronym we're going to do, which is all the various maintenance inspections that need to be done on the aircraft periodically throughout the airplane's lifetime. The AERO acronym was the one I learned when I first started flying way back last century in 1989. And back then, it was AERO with 2 R's. Some people, because of the type of flying they do, may only have AERO with 1 R, but here in the state of Minnesota, we can still have 2 R's, meaning the second R, the R meaning registration. The first one is the one that's required by the federal government. You have to register the airplane with the federal government. Now it has to be done every 36 calendar months. It used to only be you had to register the airplane when you bought the airplane or sold the airplane, or if the name on the registration was a human being, if that person died, then you had to re-register the airplane. About 4 or 5 years ago, the FAA said that they were running out of tail numbers, and so to make sure that they knew exactly where all their airplanes were and if they were all being used or not, they required everybody to re-register the airplanes. And if any tail number that was not re-registered during that initial time frame, they were going to be allowed to assign that tail number to another airplane. Now, personally, I think it happened because of 9/11. After 9/11 and the Homeland Security Office was created, I think they went to the FAA and said, "Where's all your airplanes?" And they showed them the registration books, and they say, "This airplane hasn't been re-registered since 1955. Are you still sure it's where it is?" So I think that was another reason why we have to do it every 36 calendar months, and also because now I think you got to pay money to re-register the airplane. So now it's another source of revenue for the FAA as but here in Minnesota, we also have to carry a state registration. Now, we didn't find anything specifically in the Minnesota regulations that said we had to carry it within the airplane, but I think it's just a convenient place to put it because but in Minnesota, they're not even trying to hide it. The reason the registration exists in Minnesota is because of the listing of the aircraft, but the main reason they're listing the aircraft is for taxation. They use that money and the money that is part of the air to help fund the Department of Aeronautics, which does an excellent job here in the state of Minnesota, promoting aviation in the state and keeping our airports open and running. They do a lot of good work throughout the state of Minnesota. So the registration fee for the airplanes is really not that is important for us to be able to do. Oh, here, try this one more time here. So way back last century in 1989, the second R was radio station license. But in 1996, this requirement disappeared for all domestic flights. So now, as you can see on the slide here, only if you're flying to a foreign destination do you need to have a radio station license on board your airplane. You get that radio station license from fcc.gov because the Federal Communication Commission is the organization that handles all the stuff for radio and television. And it's a radio station license for the airplane because when you key the mic, you're turning the airplane into a radio station and broadcasting over the radio airwaves. Excuse me. So so that's why it's called the radio station license for the airplane. So when I'm doing my check rides, I get all sorts of radio licenses, but Terry Hauser's really trying to get on here. Must be having a heck of a time. So, but yeah, the official term for it is a radio station license. You can either do it if you own your own airplane, you can do it for the individual aircraft itself. If you decide that you want to fly to Canada from Minnesota, but if you're like Thunderbird, if we wanted to do back in the days when we had to do it for the whole fleet, we could buy one radio station license for the whole fleet. It wouldn't have a specific tail number on the radio station license itself. Of course, now if you are planning on flying to a foreign destination, then on the bottom line there, the permit, the extra piece of paper that you need to carry with you on your person, along with your medical and your private pilot certificate and your government issued picture ID, will be a restricted radio operator's permit. I made an emphasis on this one for all my students because this is one of the things that they would have to do if they ever decide after they leave the academy they want to go fly for the airlines. This is one of the documents that they need to send to the airlines to prove that they're able to talk on the radio when they travel to a foreign destination. So it's not a radio, it's not a license because in the FCC world, if you're going to get a license, you got to take a test. I believe I misspelled this. It's a restricted radio telephone operator's permit. Radio telephone's all one word. The permit means that all you got to do is fill out an application and nowadays send them money. Way back last century when I got my restricted radio telephone operator's permit, it was free. Somebody threw me in a lake once with all my clothes on, and when I pulled stuff out of my wallet, this permit came out in a million little pieces. So I called the FCC up and said, I need a replacement for my restricted radio telephone operator's permit. They said, send us $50. I said, you don't understand, I got it when it was free, I just need a replacement. They said, send us $50. So. The next letter in this acronym is the letter O. I always like to teach this with meaning operations and limitations. Some people make this the O in operator's handbook, but I go operations and limitations because as you can read there, and I highlighted that one part, all the markings and placards must be on the aircraft in the appropriate spot. In your POH for your particular airplane, what the markings and placards need to say and where they need to be will be listed in section 2 of the POH, usually in the last part of that section. But also in section 2 is all the limitations. In addition to, so but instead of memorizing all the individual numbers that are in that section, some of the more important limitations are also marked on all the gauges. The red, yellow, green, and white markings on all the gauges are all to help us so we don't have to memorize every number in section 2. When we start the airplane, we look at the oil pressure gauge. If it's in the green, we know we're good to go. If it's in the yellow, you may have to think about it a little bit, but if it's in either the red on the low side or red on the high side, we're probably going to need to shut down the engine and figure out what's wrong with our airplane. So, but the operations side does include the official pilot's operating handbook or approved flight manual for the, or airplane flight manual for the aircraft itself. It's not something you can buy off of the shelf at our pilot shop or off of sporties.com online. It's the official airplane flying flight manual that is for that specific aircraft. So it's got to have not the exact tail number on it, but at least the that operator's handbook, the flight manual has to had the same series of serial numbers that are that correspond to what your airplane is. So we have all sorts of different kind of books at Thunderbird Aviation because our Piper aircraft have been built through many, many different years. So the O is operations and limitations, just to reiterate real quick. The operation side is the official airplane flight manual available in the aircraft itself, and all the placards and markings that are talked about in that airplane flight manual, that they're on the say what they're supposed to and put in the appropriate place as it says in the book. And the limitation side, all the red, yellow, and green markings on all the gauges corresponding to the real important numbers that are also listed in section 2 of the flight manual, POH. The last letter in the word arrow is the weight and balance document. This is usually put in section 6 of the POH in the airplane because that's the section that talks about weight and balance. But this document here does not include the arms of all this, the front seats, back seats, baggage, fuel. It doesn't do any of that stuff. This weight and balance document here is only to let the pilot know what the basic empty weight of the airplane is and what the moment is at that weight, so that you can use that information to start the weight and balance calculation, where you're going to use the arm of the front seat, the arm of the back seat, the arm of the baggage compartment, and the fuel compartment to do the weight times arm equals moment situation, to add up all the weights to make sure you're not overweight, then add up all the moments, and divide the total moment by the total weight to make sure that you're within center of gravity limits for both. And I always make sure for my students doing their private and commercial end of course that they do it for both takeoff and landing, because those flights specifically have a cross-country portion in it. So you want to make sure that you're going to be within weight and balance limits on both ends of the flight. So the weight and balance document in the airplane is, in some aircraft, is actually printed in the weight and balance document. I've flown some aircraft like the Cirrus, where the book is printed specifically for the airplane that you're flying. It even has the tail number on the cover. So then back in the weight and balance section, you don't have to look for a particular document inside the information where it talks about the weight and balance of the airplane. The basic empty weight and the moment for that weight are listed in the information that's on the printed page. For most other aircraft that I've ever flown, it's always been a piece of paper, formal piece of paper, filled out by the mechanic who does the weight or just the change of weight of the aircraft. What was removed, what was added, what were the stations where the arms where those things were removed and added to. And so what is the new weight of the airplane and what is the new moment? The other thing that I always ask my student then is what is included in the basic empty weight that appears on that document. The basic empty weight includes the aircraft itself, obviously, all the oil. Basic empty weight includes all the oil. There's some airplanes out there that were built before 1970 something that are just empty weight. And so then in those aircraft, you have the oil, you have to add the amount of oil that you're putting in the airplane too. But the most airplanes that we fly now are basic empty weight. They include a full load of oil. The fuel is only the unusable fuel, that portion of fuel inside the tanks that once you put gas in at one time, you're never going to get it out again. So the weight of the aircraft, all the oil, the weight of the fuel, then operating fluids. So most of the aircraft we fly at Thunderbird for the private pilot portion just has the brake fluid for the brakes. For the Arrows and the Seminoles, it also includes the hydraulic fluid required to run the gear up and down. So basic empty weight, aircraft, all the oil, unusable fuel, operating fluids, and the last one seems to be obscure, a little bit obscure to me, but it's called installed equipment. The only thing I can think of for this is that rather than, if you change the radio, rather than having to reweigh the whole airplane, you can do the math. I took out a 2-pound radio at this arm. I added a 1-pound radio at this arm. Here's the new basic empty weight. And because of the different weight of the radio, here's the new moment at that weight, so you know where to start. Most of the time, our mechanics, when they add a new piece of paper to Section 6 for the weight and balance document, they don't just tear out the old one, they leave the old one in there, but draw a big line across it, write superseded on it, so we can see if they, watch the history of the change of weight of the aircraft as it goes by. And so we always have to make sure we're looking for the weight and balance document that has not been superseded by some other document itself. But like I said, I could not find anything specifically that said the weight and balance document had to be in the airplane, but one source I found was talking about the weight and balance document is sort of part of the operations limitations we talked about under the letter O here. And it's sort of the same sort of thing. We just add the W to it to remind everybody that the document is inside the airplane itself. So now on to a new acronym. So now we talked about the airworthiness document required to be in the airplane. So here is a list of maintenance inspections that must be done on the airplane to prove that the airplane is still airworthy. Now, like I said, the last person to take a look at the airplane to figure out whether it's airworthy or not is the pilot in command that's going to fly the airplane. That's what the pre-flight inspection is for. But before you walk out to the airplane, you want to make sure that the airplane is, from the maintenance standpoint, is airworthy to go. Are there any write-ups in the airplane that have not been taken care of by a mechanic? Are all the inspections we're about to talk about here, have they all been complied with in the times that we're going to talk about for each one of these? Now, the other thing I need to talk about here is this particular acronym has about 3 or 4 different variations on the theme here about what all these letters mean. I've seen aviate, I've seen aviates with an S on the end of it. I've seen all sorts of different variations. I picked this one because it leaves it in the word aviate and seems to make it a little bit easier to handle. So in my acronym, the letter A stands for Airworthiness Directives. The airworthiness directives under FAR 37.9 are required. This regulation says that they must be complied with in order for the airplane to be airworthy. So this is the regulation that says that any airworthiness directive that comes out on the airplane must be complied with. When you're talking about airworthiness directives, depending on which book you read, there's either 2 or 3 types. The one that we always use because of the 737 MAX situation that just happened, we've been adding the situation where it says an emergency airworthiness directive. The emergency one basically grounds the entire fleet of whatever aircraft the airworthiness directive is for until whatever they found wrong with the airplane has been fixed. So the airplane cannot fly until the airworthiness directive is being complied with. The other 2 types then are one-time inspections and recurring inspections. And so the majority of airworthiness directives that I've seen are all one-time inspection. The FAA found the wrong kind of bolt, or the bolt that's in there is starting to wear out and it needs to be replaced. Or in the Cessna airplanes I've flown, it's every 100 hours, check the holes in the seat track to make sure they're not being elongated so the seat will stay where you put it. I'm sorry, that's a different one. But one-time inspection. And so there, in the Piper aircraft that we fly, there's hundreds of these things. And we just have to make sure that the maintenance guys, when we get an airplane, if we get a brand new airplane, go through the records to make sure that all those particular airworthiness directives, one-time inspections have been complied with. The other one, including the C-track that I just talked about, is the other type of airworthiness directive where it's a recurring airworthiness directive. The airworthiness directives must be complied with periodically. The one that we have in most of our Piper airplanes right now has to do with the stab cable, and that stab cable must be inspected every 2,000 hours or every 7 years, whichever happens first. Most of our aircraft, it's the 2,000 hour part, but if you own a Piper Warrior and you buy it, put it in a hangar and don't touch it for 7 years, you still have to do this airworthiness directive, even though it hasn't flown even a tenth of an hour yet. So airworthiness directives must be complied with, so you want to make sure especially that the recurring ones have been complied with. So in my AV8, the letter A stands for airworthiness directives. The V then stands for VOR. Now this is only an IFR requirement, but this is one that can be done by any pilot. The VOR must be checked if you're flying IFR, must be checked every 30 days and to be found within limits. Depending on what type of check you're doing, it either has to be within plus or minus 4 degrees of a known radial, or if it's checking one against the other, they have to be within 4 degrees of each other. The other one are airborne checks, and since you're airborne and you're moving at the time, they expand that out to plus or minus 6 degrees. We'll have another discussion here, another seminar in the future that talks about IFR flying and all the requirements for that. We'll expand more into the information about the VOR checks then. But again, the V in AV8 stands for the VOR, and that must be checked every 30 days if the airplane is going to be flown IFR. So here's where mine changes. Some of the AV8s that I've seen, the A is annual, and the I is like the Roman numeral 1 to remind you that it's about 100 hours. But I do the I in AV8 as inspections. As you can see on this slide, every aircraft that is certified by that is registered with the FAA and flying in the United States must have an annual inspection. The inspection must be done every 12 calendar months. You remember, a calendar month is that time that you can get it done anytime in the month, but if with an annual, you cannot overfly it. If it's due at the end of the month and it's the first of the next month and you don't have the annual, the airplane is grounded until that annual is completed. Part 43 that it lists here on the slide in this section is the section that talks about maintenance. That's where the maintenance guys go when they're learning their stuff about the rules, are like our Part 91 rules of the road. Can everybody mute their please mute. So part 43 talks about everything they have to do as far as the maintenance is concerned. So in there, it's going to say that an annual must be done by an A&P mechanic, airframe and power plant mechanic, with inspection authorization. An A&P with an IA. So they've gotten enough experience that they can go for the extra training to get that inspection authorization. Obviously, like most things in the FAA, take a test to make sure that they know what they're doing, and then they can perform annual inspections on any aircraft. The road may be 100-hour because the 100-hour inspection, the second part of the inspections here, is only done on aircraft that's flying for hire or aircraft that are giving flight instruction. The 100-hour can be done by any A&P mechanic. The difference between an annual and 100-hour is only who signs it off. The inspection cards for both inspections are exactly the same, what they're going to look at, and the tolerances that they're going to give to all the various stuff that all the pieces of the airplane that they're looking at are exactly the same for the annual and the 100-hour. The only difference is who can sign it off. Any airframe and power plant mechanic who's gone through the training and got their airframe and power plant mechanic certificate can sign off a 100-hour. So we can't overfly the annual, but elsewhere in this reg, it says that if you are in a place that if you need to have a 100-hour inspection done on your airplane, and you're someplace where the 100-hour cannot, where there's no mechanics that can do the 100-hour, you can fly up to 10 hours to the place where the mechanic is to get the 100-hour inspection done. But for example, if it takes you all 10 hours to get there, the next 100 hours due 90 hours after that. You don't make any extra time by flying your airplane to the place to get the inspection done. We here at Thunderbird cannot overfly the 100-hour because our mechanics work right in the exact same building that we work in, so there's no flying the airplane to them. We cannot overfly the 100-hour. Then the other trick comes is if the airworthiness directive that we talked about in our letter A has the recurring airworthiness directive, it must happen every 100 hours. So we decided to do that at the same time we do the 100-hour inspection for the airplanes flying for hire or for flight instruction. Now we can't overfly the 100-hour anymore because the airworthiness directive must be complied with. There's no overfly of an airworthiness directive. So from one of those positions where we got to fly 10 hours to get the airplane to a mechanic to get the 100-hour done, and there's an airworthiness directive that is also done at that 100 hours, now we got to go to the FSDO and get a special flight permit to be able to fly the airplane to the mechanic.
Oh, no. And are they supposed to be out of the pan? Okay. And they're on the rack.
Mute your microphones, please. Let me see if I can do this here. There we go. There we go. We'll just do it that way. So like I said, the 100 hours only for those aircraft that are flying for hire, like I've highlighted here, or giving flight instruction. So if you own your own airplane, you don't have to worry about the 100 hours. You only have to worry about is the airworthiness directive due, and if it's a recurring one, and how often do you have to do that. Then the second A in Aviate stands for altimeter. And really, in order to be able to make this the word Aviate, the word altimeter basically stands in for the static check. Again, this is only if you're going to fly the airplane IFR, you must have a static check done every 24 calendar months. I've watched them do this. They bring a little box into the hangar. The regular A&P mechanics can't do this. You got to be an avionics technician to do this. They hook up a little thing to the static port and turn the thing on, and it starts sucking air to the static port. And it says on the box what altitude the airplane is supposed to be at. You check it against the altimeter to make sure that it's within 75 feet. And they run it up to altitudes way above where the airplane could ever possibly fly, just to make sure that the altimeter is all up and running and good. Sometimes you hear people say that this is a pedostatic check, but I've never seen them check the pedo side. It's only a static check to make sure that the altimeter is okay. And again, only if the airplane is going to fly in IFR conditions. So most of our Warriors are VFR only airplanes because we do not have a static check and an altimeter check on those airplanes. The transponder then is a little bit of a different deal. If you are flying in airspace where transponder is required, then that's where it's listed in 91.215 there on the slide. If you go to that regulation. If you're flying in an airspace where the transponder is required, it must be checked every 24 calendar months. Now, way back last century when I learned how to fly, everybody knew that there was basically two sections to the transponder because it was, and when the new Class B airspace appeared and we needed a transponder with mode C within 30 nautical miles of a Class B airport, or inside or above a Class C airspace, or anywhere above any kind of airspace above 10,000 feet, everybody thought transponder with mode C was all the exact same thing. But actually, it's two different sections. If you're going to fly VFR only and not fly in IFR conditions like our Warriors are, we don't do a static check, but because we're flying out of Flying Cloud and Crystal Airport within the 30 nautical mode C veil for Minneapolis Airport, we have to have a transponder check to make sure that it is putting out the right code for the 1200 part and all the other numbers involved in there. And it is also sending that code out at the proper signal strength so it can be received by the interrogator on the ground when the radar and interrogator beam hits us. So all places where transponders are required, you must have at least the mode A, or sometimes called the mode 3 section, inspected every 24 calendar months. And I added on the bottom there, for flying IFR, while they're doing the static check on the altimeter, then they'll also do the mode C check to make sure that the transponder is sending out the correct altitude through the mode C function of the transponder. One thing that, so just like right now in January 2020, where we all had to add ADS-B out to our aircraft if we're flying in areas where the transponder with mode C is required, like inside the 30 nautical mode C veil or in or above Class C airspace or above 10,000 feet, then just, back then there was all sorts of different ways of doing this. Most of the time now, the mode C is just an attachment to the back of the altimeter itself, where it takes the analog information from the altimeter, turns it into a digital signal, sends it to the transponder so it can transmit it out of the aircraft. But I learned many years ago, not that digital signal sends the altitude out based on 2992, the standard altimeter setting. Then when it hits the ground, if you're below 18,000 feet, then it's going to take and do the math for the local, put the local altimeter setting into the system, and it'll do the math and then display your MSL altitude on the screen. So you cannot fake the system. You cannot look at, oh my goodness, I'm too high, I'm in Class B airspace, I don't have permission to it. You can't reach up there and change your altimeter to make the transponder send out a different altitude, because it won't do that. The transponder always sends out its altitude through the mode C section on 2992, and then it gets adjusted if necessary once it gets to the radar site itself. Finally, in the inspections that are required to make sure that the airplane is airworthy before we go flying, is the E in Aviate, which stands for ELT. Now, in the regulation 91-207, there's two different sections that talk about what we have to check up with ELT. As we go through this, so the first thing for me is, because this is all talking about inspections, the most important section of this for the ELT is 91-207 letter D, which says that the emergency locator transmitter, the ELT, must be inspected every 12 calendar months. This inspection basically makes sure that that it's operating correctly. I put a couple of things, that it has sufficient signal strength. Basically, what our guys do, since our ELTs are still the 121.5 kind, they turn the radio on to 121.5 and turn the ELT on, and they hear whoop whoop on the radio. They know the ELT is working. Now, for those of you with the 406 megahertz, the new ELTs that can also be found by search and rescue, then the mechanics have to buy a different box so that they can hear that signal. But they check the battery to make sure it's not corroded. They check the operation of the emergency system so that if the airplane hits the ground, the ELT will turn on. So there's about 5 or 6 different things that they're going to check. But every 12 calendar months, they must check and make sure that the ELT is operating correctly. Then the other part, even though it's in the previous paragraph, 91207C, talks about the battery. Now, it's two separate things. One is the inspection to make sure the ELT works. The second thing is, when do you have to change the battery, or when do you have to recharge the battery if it's a rechargeable battery? In that case, that's what 91207 letter C talks about, and I highlighted the most salient points here on the slide. If you have 1 hour of cumulative use, the ELT has been on for a total of 1 hour in its entire life of the battery. For example, you turn it on 5 minutes every day. After 12 days, you're going to have to change the battery because you add all those 5 minutes up, and it adds up to 60 minutes. Now, what actually most likely happens is, especially on our 121.5 kind, is there's a hard landing. The little automatic system turns the ELT on. By the time somebody finally figures out which airplane is transmitting on 121.5, it's probably been 2 or 3 hours. Then you got to change the battery. So change the battery at 1 hour of cumulative use, or 50% of the battery life. Most of the time when I'm looking in maintenance logs to see if the ELT battery is okay, most of the time the 50% of the battery life is a number of months or a particular date. I guess the mechanics buy the battery, look at the battery, say this battery is good for 6 years. They put the date 3 years from now in the maintenance logs for that's when it's due, and that'll be 50% of the battery life. If you have a rechargeable battery, all you gotta do is recharge it. But most of the ones that we fly in at Thunderbird just have a regular ELT battery in it. They just have to take out the old battery and put in a new battery and write down the new times in the maintenance log itself. So in order to make sure the airplane is airworthy, like I said, the last line of defense is the pre-flight inspection itself. But then before you leave the building, you want to make sure that the airworthiness directives have been complied with, especially the recurring ones. If you're flying IFR, check and make sure the VOR has been checked within the last 30 days. And if not, just before you get in the clouds, you have to make sure that that check has been completed. You want to make sure that the inspections have been complied with, the annual for all aircraft and the 100-hour for those that are flying for hire or for flight instruction. You want to make sure if you're flying IFR that the altimeter is being checked, the altimeter has been checked in the last 24 calendar months. And the transponder, if you're flying in airspace where the transponder is required, that's been checked in the last 24 calendar months. And again, additionally, if you're flying IFR, the mode C side of the transponder has to be checked also. And finally, the E for ELT, it has to be checked every 12 calendar months to make sure it's operating correctly. Then the other thing is you have to worry about is the battery still up to date? Has it been run for an hour of cumulative use? Or is the battery life more than 50% used up? In either of those situations, you got to put a new battery in the ELT. So the next regulation I want to talk about is 91103. This is the kind of the one of those gotcha regs. So the acronym I use to remember all the stuff that's in this regulation is NW craft with a K. So all the pre-flight actions you must accomplish before you go flying. The N in NW craft stands for NOTAMs. Now, specifically when you read 91103, it doesn't say that NOTAMs must be checked. But what it does say is, before it starts listing all the other stuff we're about to talk about, it does say that the pilot must be familiar with all information regarding that flight. That's the gotcha part of the regulation. There's all sorts of all information that you could even think about that you might have to get together to be able to come up with all the stuff. But the most important thing, especially nowadays, is that you're checking the NOTAMs. There's NOTAM Ds, which talk about different things at the airport, and depending on how you're getting your NOTAMs in flight, they break it down to airport NOTAMs and navigation NOTAMs and TFRs separately. If you're just looking under in the regular NOTAM section to figure out if you have any temporary flight restrictions in your airspace, those are listed under the FDC NOTAMs, which is also all the NOTAMs for you IFR guys, where all the changes to the in-route structure and all the changes to all the approach plates are written down until the new stuff has been printed. So going through the FDC NOTAMs to find the TFRs can be a daunting task sometimes. The other thing I notice is that even though a temporary flight restriction exists over all stadium or stadia, I guess is the plural, that have more than 30,000 seats, whether they're filled or not, well, while the game is good, an hour before the game, while the game's going on and up to an hour after the game, there's a temporary flight restriction around that stadium. The only place I've been able to find any of that stuff listed is on ForeFlight. I mean, it's other size systems may do this. I'm just most familiar with ForeFlight. ForeFlight has gone through the all the baseball, football, all the various schedules in the country for college and pros, and figured out when the games are happening, and they'll put a little circle over around the stadium on the ForeFlight map to let you know if it's yellow that it's about to start. When the game starts, it turns red, but when the game ends depends on whether they go into extra innings or overtime or whatever. So you may have to, even take that with a grain of salt. It may still be going on, but whether it's yellow or red, I just stay out of that airspace that whole day. So, pre-flight actions. Be familiar with all information required for the flight. That includes all the NOTAMs that could possibly happen. If you're flying out of Crystal, you know exactly what that means. They've been redoing the taxiways and the runways for the last 3 months, and it's and the poor people at the tower that have to put the ATIS together. It's about, if you talk in a normal conversational tone at the normal conversational speed, it probably takes you about 5 minutes to get through all the NOTAMs that are going on at Crystal Airport. So then the W in NW craft is weather. Now you only have to officially check the weather by this regulation if you're flying IFR or VFR not in the vicinity of the airport. 2 months ago, we had a discussion on winter weather and how that can affect flying. And we talked back then a little bit about all the weather sources that you can get to, and which ones are official and which ones are just that give you the same information but are not official weather briefings. But if you're flying IFR or not in the vicinity of the airport, you must check the weather. Another one that's IFR and not in the vicinity of the airport is known traffic delays. So if you're flying IFR, you're supposed to be able to check and see if there's any delay in traffic. This usually doesn't happen for us general aviation folks. When I was flying for Masabe Airlines, if there was a line of thunderstorms between, we'd fly to Detroit, so if there was a line of thunderstorms through the middle of Wisconsin and everybody only had one small little space that they could fly through to get from here to there, then there was all sorts of traffic delays because they're trying to fit a normal day's worth of airline traffic through that one small hole in the thunderstorms, the line of thunderstorms. And so that can be a situation. Most of the time when I'm flying general aviation-wise, IFR, I usually don't have a problem with that. If it's a thunderstorm like that, general aviation-wise, I'm probably not going to be flying there anyway. Any flight that you do, VFR, IFR, staying at the airport you've flown your entire life or going to a different airport, you got to know what the runway lengths are. So chart supplement book, the old, used to be called the Airport Facilities Directory. ForeFlight has all the airport information in it, and also the chart supplement information also. Any place that you can go to figure out what the runway lengths are, that's something that you're required to do before you go flying. Alternatives is the A, especially if you're flying IFR, but also not in the vicinity of the airport. It's alternatives if the flight cannot be completed as planned. The IFR, when we do the IFR discussion in a future seminar, we'll talk more about how to determine whether you need an alternate and what does the weather have to be at that alternate. We'll talk more about that later. But one of the pre-flight actions, if you're flying VFR and going someplace else, is alternatives. So I always teach our private pilot students, take a look at the chart. Where are the other airports around where you're flying? If something happens to the airplane and you need to put the airplane on the ground, but it's still sort of flyable, where are the nearest airports that you can get to? So do you know what the frequencies are for those airports? and for both the CTAF and the weather, so that you're able to get that information before you have to go land there. If you're flying IFR or not in the vicinity of the airport, you need to know what your fuel requirements are. Do you have enough fuel to get to where you're going? If you're flying VFR in the daytime, you have to have enough fuel to get to your destination plus 30 minutes after that. If it's nighttime, it's the fuel to your destination plus 45 minutes. If you're flying IFR, the regulation says you have to have enough fuel to get to your destination, then to your alternate, then 45 minutes after that. Now, there's a couple of other determinations about whether you need an alternate or not, and we'll talk about that in the IFR seminar. But the full regulation for the IFR fuel requirement is to your destination, to the alternate, and 45 minutes thereafter. Here at Thunderbird, we want to make sure that you definitely have enough gas, so all our renters and students who fly with us must have enough gas in the airplane to fly an hour after they get to their destination, or destination alternate, and then an hour thereafter. Day or night doesn't make any difference. And for any flight that you're doing, then you must know the takeoff and landing distances going to the POH, whether it's the one in the airplane that we talked about earlier under operations limitations, or one that you've bought off the shelf that has the same sort of charts in it. Make sure before you leave, and then it also, like in the Piper world, you also have to do the weight and balance, because the weight of the aircraft is also included in determining the takeoff and landing distances, knowing how long it's going to take you to take off and how long it's going to be before you land. Of course, Michael Collins was an author, and he wrote for Flying Magazine, AOPA magazine, many years ago. And he would always fly everywhere he went in his Cessna 310. And when he was doing talks, speaking engagements, stuff like that. So he was flying all over the place. And one of the articles he talked about in planning was, what do you do when you look at the chart in the book for the takeoff distance? Are you going to be able to take off in that amount of runway? Are you going to be able to land in that amount of runway? And the article went on to talk about when they put that chart together, it was put together with a test pilot flying the airplane. It was a brand new airplane. There were no dings or dents in it. And everything was, and all the flight controls are working perfectly, as perfect as they possibly can. I always tell my students, Mr. Lycoming's out there tuning the engine with an inch of being perfect. So then so it's going to be the most perfect aircraft that's ever going to be, so that the takeoff and landing distances can be as short as possible. The other thing is, most of the ones that you look at are not normal takeoff and normal landing. They all have to do with short field takeoffs and short field landings. So the suggestion by Mr. Collins in his article was, take the number that you get off the chart and multiply that times 1.5. That's a 50% increase over what the book is telling you to do. If you still have enough runway left to take off, with a 50% increase, if you still have enough runway to land with a 50% increase of the number you get off the chart, then you probably feel fairly safe that you're going to be able to get the airplane off and back on the ground in a safe manner. So now 91205 is the required equipment. For all my students who are coming through my end of course for private and commercial, we always talk about what do you have to do if something's broken on the airplane, and that's 91213. And my maintenance buddy, Paul Block, is going to be talking about that next Saturday at 1 o'clock. And one of the parts of that regulation is check and make sure that the part that's broken is not required by 91205 or any other rule of this part. We'll go through the 91205 stuff here. The any other rule of this part is, like we just talked about, do you need a transponder where you're flying? Are you going to be flying above 12, 5, 14, or 15? So you're going to need oxygen on board your airplane. That's where the any other rule of this part is coming from. But 91205, we all remember tomato flames. But a few years ago, they changed some of the requirements in the VFR day portion. And so I had to add the letters AF to the front of tomato flames to make sure that we capture all the possible iterations of what is required for VFR day. The A in AF tomato flames is the new thing. If you're flying in daytime, you need anti-collision lights, only if your aircraft was certificated after March 11th, 1996. So if it was certificated before March 11th, 1996, it doesn't need anti-collision lights for the daytime, but it does if it was certificated, I read that to be built, came off the assembly line after March 11th, 1996. So a lot of our warriors don't need anti-collision lights to fly in the daytime, but all the cadets that we have and all the Cessnas that we fly are all built in the early 2000s, and so their anti-collision light systems must be operable to fly a day VFR. The second one that I didn't spend a whole lot of time teaching because I was in Minnesota or in Tennessee was this thing about flotation devices. But flotation devices are required if the airplane is flying for hire and you're outside the gliding distance of the shore at the altitude that you're flying at. There's no specified distance in this regulation. If you're flying over Lake Mille Lacs at 500 feet and you're flying for hire, then you probably better have flotation devices, because when you get over the middle, you're not going to be able to glide back to shore. But flotation devices and signaling devices are only required if you're flying over the water and you're flying for hire. So now the tomato flames, the one that everybody remembers. The first thing is a tachometer, one for each engine for you multi-engine guys, an oil pressure gauge to make sure that the oil pressure is working correctly, and then a manifold pressure gauge. I put these two pressure gauges right next to each other to remind myself that there's two pressure gauges in tomato flames. The manifold pressure gauge is only required if you're flying by this regulation, if you're flying an altitude engine. An altitude engine, the way I read it, is one that's been turbocharged or supercharged or something that increases the pressure of the air going to the carburetor or the fuel injection system so that the engine thinks it's at a lower altitude than it really is. So this manifold pressure gauge is an altitude engine. Now, Mr. Lycoming says, if you're going to put a controllable pitch prop on the front of my engine, then you better have a manifold pressure gauge on there, but that's in your airplane, but that's a manufacturer's requirement. That's not 91205 is looking for. So a tachometer, then two pressure gauges, then the airspeed indicator, just something that tells you how fast the airplane's going. The second T in tomato is a temperature gauge, only if it's a liquid cooled engine. And then an oil, check this thing about 15 times. This is supposed to be oil temperature gauge if the airplane is an air-cooled engine. So I apologize for that. So temperature gauge if it's liquid cooled, oil temperature gauge if it's air-cooled. So I got my two temperature gauges next to each other. Now we're into flames. So the F in flames is fuel gauges. You need one per tank. Landing gear position indicators, what it says in the regulation. Some of my students say landing gear position light because they're reminding themselves of the thing we're going to talk about next, which is the landing light that's required for night. But it just has to be a position indicator. When I was in the Air Force flying backseat in the F4, the landing gear position indicator was just pictograms. If it looked like tire treads there, the gear was down. If it was all dashes, it was in transit, it was blank, the gear was up. So that was the landing gear position indicator. Yes, most of the airplanes I fly now, civilian-wise, it's a light that comes on or a series of lights that come on to let you know that the gear is down and locked. You must have an altimeter. Now this one is just any altimeter that you can come up with, anything that tells you where you are in relationship to not any specific, not the same altimeter that we were talking about in the Aviate section. We'll talk more, you're going to see the word altimeter again as we go through this 9205 stuff. Obviously a magnetic compass, and then the E in flames is an ELT, which we just talked about. The S in flames, I always write down as seat belts and shoulder harnesses, only because the FAA calls it a safety belt, but a safety belt must be there for each occupant that's over 2 years old. And that was a requirement until 1978. In 1978 was the first time the FAA required shoulder harnesses in general aviation airplanes. And that was then, it was only for the people in the front seats. So they wouldn't bang their head on the dashboard if the airplane crashed. Then another date happened. They finally decided, well, maybe that's such a good idea for the people in the front seats. Maybe we should do it for the people in the back seats too. So shoulder harnesses became required for all seats in small general aviation aircraft in 1986. So all our cadets and all our Cessnas have shoulder harnesses in the back seat too. So some people just write down seatbelts for the S and A estimated flames, but I write down seatbelts and shoulder harnesses because of this change in times. I have flown in aircraft that were certificated or before July 18th, 1978, and all they had in it was a lap belt. It feels real weird to fly an airplane with only a lap belt in it, but it was perfectly legal. So then, if you're flying VFR at night, you need everything that we just talked about, all of AF tomato flames, plus all the stuff in the word flaps. The F is fuses. If there are fuses in the airplane that are within that the pilot can get at, then you must carry 3 of each type or 1 full set. Now, fuse, for those of you who don't know, fuse is one of those things that governs the amperage in the airplane. If too many amps are flowing through a circuit, there's a little wire inside the fuse. The wire gets hot, the wire melts, and the electricity stops flowing. The only way to get the electricity flowing again is take out the bad fuse and put in the new fuse. I would say most of you are flying airplanes that you don't have to worry about this requirement because you don't have fuses in your airplane. All airplanes that I've ever flown in my entire life have all had circuit breakers. I've never seen an airplane with fuses. Not saying they don't exist, but most of the airplanes I've flown have circuit breakers instead of fuses. But if you got fuses that you can get at, you got to carry extra ones. The landing light, even though I think this is silly, if you own your own airplane, you don't need a landing light. You only need a landing light if you're flying for hire, same as the flotation devices in the previous list. But if I'm flying over the middle of Lake Michigan, I'm probably going to want to have flotation devices. If I'm going to land an airplane in the dark, I want a landing light. And in collision lights, again, this is a repeat from earlier in the A of AF tomato flames, because now you only, for the airplanes that were certificated before 1996, you only need anti-collision lights to fly in the dark. The P is for position lights. The position lights are the red, green, and white lights on this thing. I couldn't hook my little picture up to this motion here, so that's why this picture's been in the lower corner of the slide here the entire time. The red light is on the left side, red and left, 3 or fewer letters. The green is on the right side, green and right have the same number of letters, but the third position light is the white light in this picture here that happens to be on the tail of the airplane pointing backwards. Now, some of our airplanes have the red and green lights on the appropriate side and the white lights attached to the same piece on the back of the wingtip. But as you can see, the red light and the green light are shielded, so you only can see them from the side and the front. So that's why they're called position lights. If you see red and green, doesn't matter which side they're on. If you're seeing red and green, that airplane's coming straight at you in the dark. If you only see green light, the airplane is going from left to right. If you see a red light, it's going from right to left. And if you see one steady white light, then the airplane is going straight away from you. Or see any steady white lights, the airplane is going straight away from you. If you're seeing flashing lights, that's the anti-collision lights. If you're seeing red and green and a white light, big, huge white light in the middle, halfway between the red and the green, that's probably the landing light. Or like on a Cessna's on the wing. And finally, the requirement for night is a source of power. I'm running a little long here, so I won't give you my balloon story, but let's move along here. So now, if you're flying IFR, then you need everything for VFR day, and if you're flying IFR at night, you need everything for VFR at night, plus what I use is the word grab card. This is the IFR stuff. The G in grab card is for generator, or like most airplanes nowadays, you have to have an alternator. You got to have radios, but not just comm radios. And for the IFR requirement, you have to have navigation radios suitable for the route to be flown. So if you just write it in a grab card and you just write the word radios, you got to remind yourself somehow that it's the COM and nav radios are both required for IFR. Now here's the altimeter appearing again. It was in AF tomato flames, but this altimeter required for IFR must be sensitive, which is what I would say 95% of us see in our airplanes anyway. The one that has the Colesman window, it has the altimeter setting knob, whatever you want to call it, where you can set it to the current altimeter setting so that you know exactly what altitude you're at. If you're below 18,000 feet in the United States, or if you're flying above 18,000 feet, you set it to 2992 and fly the pressure levels. But to fly IFR, you must have a sensitive altimeter. The B is the ball inside the inclinometer, and the turn and slip indicator, the turn coordinator. The C in card is for the clock. This clock must be installed in the airplane, and it must be operating in the airplane before you leave the ground if you're flying IFR. The one on your wrist doesn't count unless you're already flying and then the clock stops working. You have to have an attitude indicator so you can figure out which way is up and down and right and left for banking. Along with the ball, you need a rate of turn indicator, either the turn and slip indicator, or most modern airplanes have a turn coordinator telling you what your rate of turn is. And the D in card is a directional gyro, a gyro connected to a card that either has a magnetic input to it, so it always tells you which way you're going, or like most of the airplanes I fly, you look at the magnetic compass and twist the knob to set the heading correctly. Now, I know some of my instructors out there do a card with 2 Ds. So if you add a second D, it's for the people that you're training to go to the airline someday. If you're flying above 24,000 feet, you must have DME or a suitable substitute on your airplane. Like in our airplanes that go above 24,000 feet, but if you have GPS on board, the GPS system can substitute for DME. So let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, so you're still all muted, but if anybody has any questions, you can now unmute yourself and ask me anything we got about aviation acronyms. Like they tell me in instructor school, I'm sitting here counting to 10 to make sure nobody has any questions. Alrighty, so, oops, because I did something else there, I got to do this again. So, again, my name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor for Thunderbird Aviation. I'd like to thank you all for coming to this seminar today. Again, if you want wings credit and you're not already registered, make sure you go to faasafety.gov, go to the upper right-hand corner of the web page that comes up, click on the part that says you want to become a member of faasafety.gov. It does all sorts of wonderful things. There's all sorts of neat stuff on that site besides just stuff for wings credit. The wings credit, if you do 3 seminars and within the same 12 calendar month period, pick a phase of the flight portion of the FAA-sponsored pilot proficiency program, which is what it's officially called. You pick a flight portion of the wings program and do that in the same 12 calendar months that you've done 3 safety seminars, either online here through AOPA. And again, faasafety.gov has a whole bunch of safety seminars that the FAA has put together on their own, so that you have many places that you get the safety seminars from. Then you can go onto that site, figure out what phase, beginning, advanced, or master, and each of the 20 different levels inside each one of those. You don't have to start at the bottom and go to the top. You can pick any level of the flight portion that you want. Just make sure that the safety seminars that you're attending match the level that you want to go for. If you're going for a master wings credit, then you have to choose master safety seminars to match it up. But anyway, 3 safety seminars, and then pick a phase of the flight, print out what it's supposed to be, take it to a flight instructor, fly with that flight instructor. I think officially the flight's supposed to be 3 hours long, but if you on the sheet of paper is the what you're supposed to fly, which maneuvers you're supposed to fly, and what the standards are that you must meet in order to pass that phase. If you do it, if you get all that done in 30 minutes, you're done in 30 minutes. If it takes you 6 hours, it takes you 6 hours. So there's, even though it says something about 3 hours in there, there's a lot of slop in that time. It also has extra stuff on the FAAsafety.gov site. It's an excellent resource for all sorts of things, besides just the stuff on wings credit. Like I said, including safety seminars put out by the FAA themselves. So just a reminder, next Saturday at 1 o'clock on the through this same system here, through our Zoom system at Thunderbird Aviation, our maintenance director, Paul Block, is going to be talking about, I believe I heard him say this the other day, he's going to be talking about Regulation 91.213. What do you do if there's inoperative instruments or equipment on your airplane? Can you go flying or not? What is the process you have to go through in order to determine the airplane once you're doing a pre-flight and find something broken on the airplane? My next seminar will be next month on the 9th of January. I'm trying to do this every second Saturday of the month, so that it becomes a habit pattern for all you people who love listening to Fred Nauer talk on Zoom. This one will be from 1 to 3 o'clock, a 2-hour long one, because this is the one I usually do after Christmas, which is why I put the Christmas trees on the slide. The title will be, Did You Get an iPad for Christmas, and are you going to put ForeFlight on it? So this will be a ForeFlight introduction for everybody who's brand new to the iPad/ForeFlight world. So, ran just a little bit long, and I apologize for that. Thank you very much again for attending the safety seminar. Are there any more questions, comments, concerns? Thank you very much for coming.